Let's give you another example. You know how we have like phobias, like claustrophobia, agoraphobia, what's a spider? Arachnophobia. Has anyone seen that movie, Arachnophobia? Yeah, that's pretty freaky, eh, that movie? Anyway. And so we have a phobia. Why do we have phobias? It's exactly the same reason. It's got nothing to do with the spider, the height, the closed space, nothing. It's got everything to do with the withdrawal of love from one or both of our parents who were in that situation at the time with us. So, for example, you go along, a little child, 2 years of age, you go along, you pick up a redback spider and you're looking at it. And for overseas people, a redback spider is like a black widow but with a red back on the back of it. And you look at it and it can bite you and it can cause you death, but the child's not thinking about it. That's just looking at the spider. I actually did this when I was a child. I can remember doing it. My mother came out, brushed the spider off me in a panic and rage, and in that moment, no love. So what did you think I associated spiders with? Spiders, no love from mum. Spiders, no love from mum. Spiders, total fear of spiders. And what is it you're afraid of, really? No love from mum. I can't feel that there's no love from mum. And it's the same with falling from a height, you know, fear of heights, fear of closed-in spaces, fear of anything, all related to things related to our parents and their emotions about those things that caused us to feel a lack of love at the time. So can you see how the cause, finding the cause, often has nothing to do with the effect in a seemingly logical manner? So, for most of us, we look at, how many of you are afraid of spiders? How many of you are afraid of snakes, spiders, lizards, frogs, mice? Put them all together, how many of you are afraid? Okay, so 90% of the audience. All of those things have nothing to do with the animal. And you can test this if you want. You can put the animal in your hand and feel your terror. And next week, you're going to have just as much terror as you had the first time you put the animal in your hand. Until you make the link that it's about the withdrawal of love, you will not address the phobia. Does that make sense? Because it's only when we address the cause the phobia disappears. It's always the cause. Never the effect. And many of us can try to deal with it. So how many of you are afraid of heights, falling from a height, dropping, free falling from a height, and all of those kind of things? Right? So probably 50% of the audience. That has something to do with something that happened to you as a child related to the withdrawal of love and you falling. So you might have been in your mum's arms. Or you might have been this, you know, daddy's throwing you up, catching you, throwing you up, catching you, and you're laughing and carrying on and everything's funny. And then mum comes in the room and says, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" It could be that event that causes you to be afraid of that feeling. And so now every time you're driving along the road and you go over a little bump, ooh, that's a feeling, the same feeling. Yeah? And you're not ever going to get rid of that feeling until you link the cause, which is my mother's withdrawal of love of a fear projected at daddy throwing me up in the air and catching me. Does that make sense? Does it make sense? Yeah? Logical? Yeah? Igor?
How can we make a link if we don't remember?
Well, it's very hard to make the link, but if this is why we're having this discussion, is to understand, and this is why I brought this situation up, is to understand that most causes are to do with love, not to do with other things. So they're to do with love or a lack of it. So anything that is loving causes a loving and joyful effect. Anything that is unloving causes a unloving effect. So if I've got a fear of money, or I don't have enough money in my life, for example, it's got to be related to love somehow. And the key is for you to just, allow yourself, allow yourself to have the awareness at your soul level that it has to be related to love somehow. Instead of trying to guess that it's related to something else other than love. Does everyone follow that? A lot of times what we're trying to do is we're trying to guess that it must be this and that happened and this event happened or whatever, but we're not relating a lot of our stuff to love, and it's the love that needs to grow in us, and it's the love that needs to change, and love and fear cannot coexist at the same time. And so therefore many of the unloving effects are caused by fear-based lack of love causes, and there is a linkage between love and the lack of love and our fear. When you get down to it, you'll find that all of your fear is related to love. All of it. A feeling that you're not loved, a feeling that you cannot be loved, a feeling that you're unlovable, a feeling that you're unworthy to be loved, a feeling... All of your fear is related to that at some point. And the reason why is because every single time your parents were in fear or in anger, which is the denial of their fear, you did not feel loved. And yes, we do need to process the emotions, we need to process, but in the end you will come to see the relationship. And it took me a while, to be honest, Igor, to actually stop trying to... work out events and situations and so forth, and to start seeing that God was just correcting love within me. And this is what the law of cause and effect helped me to understand, was that God is actually correcting the love or the type of love or the lack of love within me. And that was the cause of all of these unloving effects, these painful things that were happening in my life. And as long as I was willing to feel those unloving causes, to feel the feelings associated with them, I could release them and come to understand love in the process. Joy, please.
Is that why I heard a comment that you said that if you were conceived during the war, then you're conceived out of fear, and so the fear means that there's no love during that conception, like?
No, I don't think I've ever said that. I've said that if you were conceived during the war and your parents were in fear at the time, then obviously there was no love present in your life from that time, and it would be associated with potential acts of violence. So you would actually have a terrible phobia about any violent act. You won't want to watch it on telly probably, or you'll do exactly the opposite. You'll get video after video after video violent, wanting to watch the movies of violent videos and violent... You know what I mean? You'll do one or the other generally. And a lot of our emotions are... There is always a love component in our emotions. In other words, or a lack of love component in our emotions. And we need to see the relationship between the love components and what's going on in the effect of the emotion. And so, like, for many of you, how many of you were born during the war years, the Second World War years? Is there many of you? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, around 5 or so. How many of you had parents who experienced the Second World War? And where do your emotions come from? Your primary environment is your parents, is it not? So can you see that for many of us, there are going to be fear emotions about the lack of love when it comes to situations that are violent or potentially violent, a threat of war, a threat of potential violence, anarchy and so forth. Those emotions are going to be within us. Because a lot of us, or our parents, for a lot of them, they did not release those emotions. Yeah? For me, with regard to war, it was my grandparents. So my father was born just after my grandfather came home from war, and my mother was born after that. So both of my grandfathers went to war. So for me, I'm a third generation from, 3 generations from a war, but many of you are only 2 or 1 generation from a war, which means you're going to have more emotions associated with that potential violence. Yep.
Hi, AJ.
How are you?
I'm not feeling very good. I'm adopted.
Yep.
And having 2 sets of parents.
Do you know both of them now?
I do.
You do,
yeah.
yep. Yep.
Yes. And they're so...
Different?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, like my biological dad rides a Harley.
Yep.
So I've got a Harley. But
Yep.
my dad that I grew up with is so scared about me riding my Harley that I didn't tell him about it for
Yeah.
years and years and years, and then, stepping in truth. Anyway, that's a story, but
Yeah.
I get really confused in
Where it came
finding
from.
my causes. Yeah.
You don't need to worry where a causal came from.
Which parent?
No, you don't need to worry about which parent it came from. Your body will tell you anyway. Left side has to be feminine, right side has to be masculine. So whatever happens to my left side has to be related to myself. If I'm a woman, whatever happens to my left side has to be related to myself or my mother or my dad's viewpoint of my mother. And whatever happened to my right side has to be related to my father or men or my mother's viewpoint of men. It's quite simple. The body is going to tell me all of that. So I don't need to have to worry about all of that anyway. All I need to do is feel it. Feel the one that's there. That's the trick. You see, for most of us, what we're trying to do still is work it out before we feel it. And why do we do that? Because we're afraid. Why are we afraid? Because we want to control the emotion so that we don't go overboard with the emotion and go into crazy. Does that make sense? But in terms of giving you a bit more of an issue about the issue of adoption, the biological mother and father will have had their child for a certain period of time. It might be 1 week from gestation to 1 week.
Given away at birth.
Given away at birth,
Yep.
so it's still gestation through to birth.
Yeah.
So there's still the first basically 9 months where you would have absorbed the emotions of mum and dad. Does that make sense? And then if you're given away at birth, then you start absorbing the emotions of this mum and dad, the adoptive parents.
Do I still absorb, knowing my biological parents, have done for a little while, am I still absorbing their emotions? Or
Well, not really. What happens is
my childhood?
during this 9-month period, you absorb and have a connection with them, and you absorb a lot of their predisposed emotions. Does that make sense? Which automatically makes you open to understanding them and open to feeling their type of emotion, automatically. So when you reconnect with them later in your life, you will automatically feel certain things as a result of your openness to feeling things from them already. That's already been established.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And your period of time with this group of family will actually predispose you to actually accepting emotions from that type of parents, whoever they are. But in the end, the underlying result is that we still need to feel our causal emotions, and we just need to release them and allow ourselves to get to them. And a lot of times we want to know because we don't want to feel.
It's my brain wanting to know which parent it is or something.
Yep. Can I just write that down? It's something that would benefit many of you. If I can get the rest of this off, I'll write it down. That's a fast way of getting it off. If I want to know intellectually before I feel, then I don't want to feel emotionally. The same thing. So we're referring to one thing. So some things you'll find in your life you'll want to feel emotionally, and you'll relatively easily feel them, to be honest. Other things, you'll have this going on, where you want to know intellectually before you go ahead and do it. You want to know what's going on before you feel it. I suggest to you, if you want to know what's going on before you feel it, you don't really want to know what's going on, and you don't want to feel what's going on. So what I would do myself under those circumstances is I pray about my will, my desire to know from my heart, from my soul. That's what I pray about. I've obviously need to work on my desire to know. So there's many things that I've had to work on my desire to know, to actually have a desire or a will to feel it rather than just know it intellectually. And many of you have learned by now that actually knowing something intellectually hardly helps you at all, in many cases. And in fact, unfortunately, oftentimes puts you in a state of self-delusion, because you think you've dealt with something that you haven't even touched yet when you know it. So whenever you want to know something in advance, just stop yourself and go, okay, this is all about me not being willing to feel out of control, to feel that I don't know, to feel that I'm crazy or stupid, or, you know, lots of those kind of emotions. That's what it's mostly about. Does that make sense? Who was I answering? Sorry. Glennis, that's right. Does that make sense, Glennis? Yeah. So allow yourself to address that. The issues with regard to parents are complex, but in a way it's still the same. You know, it's the willingness to feel the emotion that's going to get you through everything anyway.
Yeah, they're pretty intense. I'm trying to deal with the time about being given away. So.
Yeah. You know, when you say it's pretty intense, my suggestion to you, many of you say these things to me, I went through this really intense experience the other day, and you explain it. And you need to have intense feelings. Your soul in its greatest power is intense. Like, that's where all your power is, in the intensity of things. You see, when we avoid intensity, we're actually avoiding our soul. We need to allow the intensity to be present. And when you do that, you won't actually need to describe an emotion as intense to other people. You won't need to do that, because you actually fully embrace the intensity. Every emotion I've ever felt has been intense. And when I say intense, like, we're talking about some things I've cried for 6 months straight. Literally, you know, like all day for 6 months. Some things. Yeah. Grief of losing my soulmate, for example, was one of those things. Now that's intense. And during that time, yes, there were times when I felt crazy, I felt, you know, all those different things, like I was losing my mind, and I just allowed myself to feel all of those feelings. And nobody else actually knew that I went through it. Yeah. The only time I stopped crying was when I went shopping and when I slept.
I'm not that intense.
But this is what I'm saying. You don't have to worry about that, because when you fully connect with an emotion, every emotion will feel intense. It will feel intense. And you need to allow your soul. Remember I gave that talk about stretching your soul, allowing your soul to expand? Intensity, you need to allow yourself to experience your emotions in an intense manner. You know how parents always go, oh, you're far too sensitive, you know, you're far too sensitive. That's a heap of crap, you know. You want a sensitive soul. You want to be sensitive. You want to feel things intensely, because eventually you'll get to the point where you've released all your pain, and the only thing you'll feel intensely is your pleasure. You imagine that. That's that one with God. Imagine that. That the only thing you feel is your pleasure, and you feel it intensely. If you have to get used to intensity. Karen, thanks.
When you cry for such a long time about something, how do you know that it's not a self-deception emotion?
Well, the law of attraction. Remember, cause and effect always tells you. So if you find things changing over that time, then you know. If external events are changing over that time, then you know that things are changing for you.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it just seemed like 6 months was a long time.
Well, it was.
Yeah.
But you don't have no idea how attached I was to my soulmate either.
Okay.
Because you've never been there, and one day you will know and understand. But you know, and so you can't really judge it. You're not going to ever feel it, and you don't need to worry about it. I'm just explaining to you that I use it as an example to say to you, allow the intensity. You know, allow it, because if you allow it, your soul expands. That's the principle I'm getting at. You won't ever have to experience that with your soulmate. It's highly unlikely many of you will want to come back to this earth, and by the time you want to come back to this earth, if you do want to come back to the earth, it's highly likely that the earth will have changed quite significantly, and there might even be some people who are at one with God who you can incarnate through and not have to deal with any emotions. That's the reality, right? So if you wanted to come back to the earth, no matter what happens from now on, you will never have to experience the pain of my soulmate loss, ever, in your own life, right? But I am saying to you that every single emotion that you actually have to feel, you will feel stretches you intensely. And you need to allow it. You need to let it happen. That's the key to growth.